The situation is getting worse. The average rent last month was nearly $1,600. In the past year alone, there has been over 7,400 kidnappings, and the crime rates in the capital city are skyrocketing. But that's enough about the UK. In this video, we're going to be talking about life in Somalia and how much it actually costs to live here. So in this video, I'll be talking you through an expense-by-expense breakdown of how much it costs to live here in the city. So let's start with the rent. So depending on what your requirements are and how big your family is, I would put your rent something between $300 a month and $800 a month, just based on examples from friends that I have. I have a good friend who rents a 3-bedroom place in a degmo called Shibis, which is a nice area. It's close to all the amenities that you would need, and that's about $300 a month. So for $300 a month, he gets 3 bedrooms with a balcony, somewhere very close. It's a nice area and things like that. All the way up to 7-bedroom villas with parking space for 8 cars and a garden, and I think he has a well even, and he has outhouses for maids to live in and stuff as well, right up below the $800 mark. So I would put it as somewhere between $300 and $800. Me personally, my place is somewhere in the middle. It's not an area that I have much experience in at all, but for those of you who do want to buy somewhere, I'll talk really briefly and I'll just give you the little information that I do have. So typically here in Somalia, you buy plots of land. So plots of land are about 12 meters by 12 meters. And prices that I've seen, if you're willing to go far out of the city, go as low as $1,000 for one of those plots, all the way up to things closer to the city, closer to the sea, for like $25,000 a plot. Or if you're looking to buy a house, there is also enormous range as well. Mogadishu really is a city that accommodates all of these different price points. So my brother-in-law actually recently on one of his TikTok accounts, he shared some videos of some houses that are selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like, these are really beautiful houses, as I say, with enormous gardens, loads of protection, big walls all around them, all sorts of stuff like this. So there are price points to accommodate whatever your budget is, really. Next up, I'll talk about food a little bit. So in this section where I'm talking about food, I'm talking about groceries. And there are kind of 3 main categories that I've seen here. So firstly, there are like markets. There's 2 really big ones that I'm mostly familiar with, Suq Ba'ad and Bakara Market. And in these markets, you can basically get anything from furniture to office supplies to food to everything else that you might want. Kind of corner shops. So by corner shop, I use that word because it's a word that we're familiar with in English, but in Somalia, they're very rarely actually on the corner. In fact, sometimes they're like a standalone shed on the side of the road sometimes, and the main purpose of these that I've actually seen is to sell ninat, is to sell sweets to children a lot of the time. Let me show you something. So here in Somalia, we actually kind of have 2 currencies. We have these, the Somali Shilling, and we also have dollars. But actual cash dollars don't seem to be very useful here. American dollars are mostly a digital currency, to be honest, but in these corner shops, this is why I bring it up now, it is really useful to have some of these shilling lying around, particularly if you have children. You can give these to the children and they can go and buy sweets with them. So this is what the Somali shilling look like, and they're actually called cash here, which is kind of interesting. The same way you can go to many places and you'll see people with like ice cream trolleys. There are people here who have like cash trolleys, and you can buy cash. You can buy like 100,000 Somali shilling, 1 million Somali shilling and things like this for like a few dollars. As I say, they're really useful to give to your children when they go and buy sweets, and they're also really useful at weddings as well. You see people giving out big handfuls of them at weddings. But a big handful of these, like 100,000 shilling, is the equivalent of like $4 or $5 or something. So in addition to buying food from these markets, in addition to buying little sweets and little things that you might need, sugar and oil or whatever you might need from these sort of little corner shop type things, there are also like Suq Asri. There are like modern malls, really. There's like Hayat Mall in Hodan and others that are similar to that as well, where you can get all of the things that you might need, things that you're used to eating if you're from the West as well. But you've got to bear in mind that some things that are there that are imported would be more expensive. Things like Oreos and Pringles and Skittles that my kids like are things that are actually more expensive here than they are in the UK. So what about your electric bills? So this massively depends on what your lifestyle is actually like. When we first moved here, we weren't really used to the weather. I'm still not, to be honest. Obviously, we want a fridge to keep food cool and stuff like that. And those things are quite hungry for electricity. And for the first few months that we were here, we were seeing electricity bills that were like $200, $250, which if you consider your rent being like between $300 and $800, that's very expensive here in comparison to your rent price. Like recently, our bills are like Sagashan or Sidetan or something like that. They're like $90 or $80, something like that. And obviously, I run an online company from here. Like, I have lights here and I have camera equipment and I have lighting in the background and we have high-speed internet and things like that. So if somebody like myself can actually live here with a fridge and stuff like that on like $50. That's very cheap. We haven't had many bills that are that low, but it really depends on what kind of a lifestyle you have and what kind of a house you have as well and how big it is. And if you've got wife and kids who are a bit posh like me. Okay, so next up, let's talk about water. Okay, so just like in other countries, there are companies that will actually supply water to your house, but it's also quite common here for buildings to actually have their own borehole and actually have their own systems for actually bringing up water from the ground for the house itself. So that's kind of one thing. But then there's also drinking water, okay? Like many cities, including London and Paris and other places, you don't really want to drink the tap water necessarily. So you can buy these little bottles of what we call bioafi, like this, even though it says an-na'im on it. It's a little bit like when brand names actually become the name of the thing itself. Like when we call those pens a biro, even though a biro is actually a company name. So now, even though the company isn't that, we still call them bioafi if they're like these little bottles. On the other hand, you can also buy these ags of bioadi. I think that's what we call them anyway. So we have like bioafi like this that comes in little bottles, and then bioadi that comes in an ag like this. Each one of these ags is $1. So we tend to get like shan or lih of these, and then when they run out, ninwawa'a, like I call the man, and then I say come, and he brings us more like this. So depending on where you get your water from, drinking water wise, you might spend like $15 a month or something like that on water, depending how big your family is. And then actually for getting water from a water supply, it might be $20, $30 a month or something like that. Okay, next up, qashinka, or your kind of waste disposal. Your qashin, your rubbish is like your waste, right? So what we get charged is like $4 every now and again. Like there's a service here, just like in other countries, where they come and take away your rubbish. And basically they just charge us every now and again. They're like, send us $4, and we just send them $4. So let's just lump that in as like $5 to $10 a month to have your rubbish taken away. Okay, next up, a lot of people here use gas. Okay, there are even like these little kind of kitchen things that people use. People like to cook with like these little things that use gas as well. So although like in lots of countries we're used to just using electric for our cookers and stuff, here it will be important to buy gas as well, but it's not expensive. Typically for like a new cylinder of gas, we'll spend, lawatan or lower, so $22 we'll spend. And that will typically last us a month. All right. So what about schools? So there is a huge variety in different types of schools that you can go to here in Mogadishu. So there are schools that I've seen where your children can go to, and they can literally just learn Quran and a couple of other things for as little as like $5 a month or something, but that's very rare, okay? Most of the time, like a good ballpark figure for sending your children to like a dugsi will be about $35 a month, right up to like international schools that offer IGCSEs and things like this, that those are about $100 to $120 a month. And they can often give you discounts if you have lots of children. So if you were to have 3 children going to an international private school, for example, you could probably send them there for like $300 or something like that. Transport. So there's different types of transport, of course. We actually have this app here in Mogadishu called Rikab, where you can book taxis on there, or you can actually buy a car. If you're going to buy a car, you can find cars available here from like $2,000 right up to like $12,000, $15,000. And typically I get the impression it's better to go on the higher end of that and get a 4x4. Like here in Mogadishu, if you want to live like a full life here and often go out of the city and go to beaches and stuff like that, it's a good idea to have a 4x4 because other cars just can't really handle the roads. Like when we drive to the beach, we always need to use a 4x4 because the smaller cars just can't really handle it. So if you want to drive, you're going to need to think about that, although petrol isn't very expensive. But we actually don't. We don't usually use a car, so we'll just go everywhere in a Bajaj most of the time. And like a Bajaj trip, the most I've ever spent on a Bajaj trip was $5, $5.50. And that was from like one end of Mogadishu from the other at peak time on Eid day. So most of the time, like if you're going up the road to the masjid or something, it'll be $0.50. It'll be $0.50 or $1, $1 or something like that. But what is the cost of internet? Of course, I mentioned like I run an online business and I work remotely here and stuff like that. So what about internet costs? I remember when I first moved here and I first started creating content for my TikTok account actually about life here in Somalia. And I talked about there being packages available for like $200 here in Somalia. And that is absolutely true. That's not what I pay, but that's absolutely true. And I got roasted online for it. People were saying you should never pay that. But something you should do if you move here or if you visit here is you should educate yourself a little bit on internet speeds. Because in the UK and in other countries, most people actually don't know what megabytes per second are and what like how fast a gigabyte would be and stuff like that. Most people really don't know that. If anything, a lot of people just know about getting data on their phone when they've got a phone plan, like 1 gigabyte a month or 10 gigabytes a month and what that kind of means. So it'd be good to educate yourself on that, because if you come here and you don't understand any of that and you just say to the internet people, give me fast internet, They'll give you fast internet, but it'll be expensive. So there are packages from like as low as like $15 a month. And I mean for like fiber optic. You know, like in some countries that I've been to here in Africa, there are some countries where like fiber optic isn't really available, or wasn't when I visited them anyway. But here in Somalia, you can get real broadband and fiber optic and good high speeds. But what I've found, a good price that you can pay here is like $30 a month. Many of these companies like Bluecom and Somtel and Hudmud, they'll have packages that start at about $30 a month and go right up to, in some cases, hundreds of dollars a month if you had an enormous company and loads of staff and stuff like that. But if when you first arrive, if you have a SIM card and you don't want to pay for broadband just yet, there's actually a really good system of just topping up your phone regularly throughout the month. You can just press Hidig 724 Hidig, put your own phone number, Hidig, and then $1 ama $2 aftergis what. So you can actually put a number into your phone and then call it, put in your PIN number, and within like a few seconds it'll put that amount of gigabytes onto your phone. So like $1 for 1 gigabyte, $2 for 2 gigabytes and stuff like that. So there's a really good system for actually having really good internet here, but there's also a good system as like a backup if you want like 4G on your phone too. And to be honest, I use both of them because if my electric goes off or something, like every now and again that might happen. You might have a power cut every now and again. And if that happens and my internet goes off for a few hours, that costs me a lot more than a few dollars. So I always just have like 5 gigabytes or 2 gigabytes or something on my phone, and I'll just tether my laptop to it if ever I need to. Okay, what about having people work for you a little bit here? So don't come for me on this, right? I'm just explaining the situation. I'm not saying that it's right or that it's wrong or anything like that. You can have people work for you and do things for you here relatively cheaply. You can hire a maid for like $70 a month. You can have a shaqala who lives with you and stuff like that. Or you can even just hire people to do other things for you. You can get people to go and pick up stuff from the shop for you and stuff like that. So we tend in our family budget just to put like $100 or so into like just people who help us with stuff really. So there are things like that maybe to consider if you want to have a shaqala who helps you with something in particular. Okay, so we've done rent, we've done electric, we've done gas, we've done schooling, we've done internet, we've done a bunch of other stuff, right? So what's left? So there's just kind of other bits and bobs that are useful. You might need to go to the shop and buy biff baff and stuff like this, things that are just useful, mosquito nets, other bits and bobs that you need around the house, whatever it is, light bulbs and stuff. So we always just kind of put like $100 or something in our budget for things like that. But I had a question on the YouTube channel, which I thought was kind of interesting about how much little kind of bits and bobs that you might normally buy on Amazon would cost in Somalia. And I thought that was kind of interesting because Amazon isn't really available here. The same way that you might buy something impulsively on Amazon and think, oh, that might look cool or that might make my life easier. That kind of spending habit isn't really available here. Part of you reducing your cost of living here in Somalia is, of course, things being cheaper, generally speaking, but there's also fewer opportunities to spend your money on stupid things. And then I can't forget about this, healthcare. So healthcare is something you really do need to think about. It's really difficult when you come to Somalia to get things like health insurance. Most companies in the UK and your bank and stuff like that, they will not insure your health for you to come to Somalia. So you should have a little bit of money to take care of little things like that. What we generally found is that we don't get sick so often in Somalia because we're eating fresher food, we have a more active lifestyle, we're breathing fresher air and things like that. But the whole time that we've been here in Somalia, which is over a year now, we've spent less than a couple of $100s on little things like that. And I've had a number of checkups on a few things. My wife's had a few checkups, malaria a couple of times and stuff, and things like that are treated really effectively and really well here. So if you get malaria, you can go to the hospital, they'll give you an injection in a big muscle, and basically you can just go home. Like it sounds like a big deal to us in the West, but malaria is treated really effectively here in Somalia. Much better than it would be in the UK, in fact. Even though life in Somalia, as I've described, can be relatively inexpensive, flights to and from Somalia are some of the most expensive that I've ever seen. You can expect to spend about $1,000 on a flight to or from Somalia or a return flight. And if you have a family like I do, $1,000 very quickly becomes $4,000, which if you do 2 trips a year very quickly becomes $8,000. So if you do come to Somalia and you want to be in Somalia long term, you really should consider how frequently you are considering going back to visit family and stuff like that. Right, now pump the brakes a second. I know you can live cheaper than this. Okay, I got some pushback online when I said about $1,500 a month to live a really good life here. I know there are lots of people who live perfectly decent lives in Mogadishu for like $500, $600, $700 and stuff. I'm just saying because most of my audience are people from the West who expect certain things and have certain expectations from their lifestyle. So I'm ramping up that number a little bit higher, but I completely understand that there are lots of people who can have a brilliant life here in Somalia for much less than that. Thank you so much for watching, and if you'd like to watch a video on why we actually made the decision to move here to Somalia in the first place, I'm going to put it right there for you to enjoy. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.